Hi there and welcome back. It's Jennifer McGuire and I hope you're having a good week. Well, today I'm back with some more examples for using alcohol ink on projects. I've been getting a lot of requests for more of these videos, and today shows how to do alcohol ink lifting using stencils. Stencils are inexpensive and something that can be used for so many techniques. So today I show you how to use them with alcohol inks. I have lots and lots and lots of examples for you today. So I'll show you the techniques and then the final cards. If you have not watched my alcohol ink videos in the past, I encourage you to do so. They show the basics, and I will link to them here. So I'm using Ranger alcohol inks and blending solution today. I like the colors they have to offer, and the price point is really good. You could also use Copic refills if you have those. I also have some rubbing alcohol in a little container off screen. And I'm going to use the Ranger alcohol ink felt applicator. This is just the ink blending tool with pieces of felt on it instead, and you'll see that in action. Here I have some scrap paper to work on and some heavyweight vellum. I thought today I would show you how you can use alcohol inks on vellum, which is something most of us have. You can use heavyweight or lightweight. It's totally up to you. I did tape it to the scrap paper so that it would keep it from kind of curling up as it got wet. Okay, so on to my felt applicator here. I am putting 3 colors of alcohol ink. I'm putting down kind of lines of the alcohol ink because I want a lot of ink on here so I can make multiple examples off screen. After I have my 3 colors down and 3 lines, I take 1 line right down the center of the blending solution. This just helps it to blend nicely. And I quickly go back and forth along the vellum. Now you can keep this light as you see here, or you can add more color to intensify it. I decided to add some more purple so it was a little less pink. Now if I were doing this on glossy cardstock or Yupo paper, this color would be much more intense. When you do this technique on vellum, it becomes much softer, and I'll show you on Yupo paper also. Here I'm using the same ink applicator, so the same colors on there, and I'm doing another example. So I went and I did a bunch with this. That's the nice thing about alcohol inks. A little goes a long way, and you can make some beautiful backgrounds. And as you've seen in my past videos, there are many different looks you can get with alcohol inks. Here's another example. This time I used like a red, a pink, and a yellow. And then I ran a little bit of blending solution down the center. And again, I'm just going to make stripes. Now you could pounce this tool on there to kind of get a splotchy look. You could do swirls. You could do whatever you wanted. I thought I'd start with a stripe, these stripe backgrounds, and then I can pick them up and set them aside. Now these scrap papers that I've taped my vellum to, I can use over and over again. And when this is ready to dry, just pick it up, set it aside, and the scrap paper keeps the vellum from curling as it dries. Once it's dry, it'll lay flat. Okay, for this example, I thought I'd do a rainbow background. I put down pink, yellow, green, and blue all in a line. And right down the center, I'm putting some blending solution. Again, I'm going to do stripes of color, and look at that rainbow blending that you get. As I mentioned, since I'm using vellum here, I'll get a much softer look. It'll be transparent. You can kind of see through it a bit. The heavier weight your vellum, the less you'll see through it. Just depends on your personal preference. So I can set this one aside to dry, but I wanted to show you how sheer this is and how soft the colors are. It's absolutely beautiful. Now I wanted to show you the same colors using the same applicator on Yupo paper. Yupo paper is a synthetic paper, and alcohol ink moves beautifully on it. Look how intense that color is. Absolutely gorgeous, and that color will continue to move a little bit over time. First, I want to show you some more examples on vellum. This time, instead of stripes, I'm just going to kind of pounce the color onto the vellum. So I did a few different shades of blues and greens here, and you'll notice that I kind of got just too much of one color. So I'm going back and adding some more green, and then going back and adding some more blue. This is one of those that you want to set aside to dry. It'll look better once it dries. I did heat set it a little bit to move the process along, but I normally don't like to heat set my alcohol ink. I think it's best when you set it aside to dry. On the other half of this vellum piece, I'm doing some red, pink, and yellow, so I could get really intense color. But remember, the colors will be softer on this vellum than they would be on like a Yupo paper or glossy paper. So I created a bunch of backgrounds on both vellum and Yupo paper, and you'll see the difference in a moment. I'm going to let those dry, and once they're done, I'm going to do an alcohol ink lift technique where we lift some of the alcohol ink away using a stencil. So I have one of my vellum backgrounds with alcohol ink here. I'm taping it down onto some scrap paper, and then I'll put the Simon Says Stamp Folk Dance stencil over it. This is a beautiful new stencil. Now for this technique, I'm going to use a mini ink blending tool from Ranger with a foam piece on it. Now earlier we used felt. That was to apply the alcohol ink, but this time I'm using foam. You can see up there on the top left. I put a little bit of the blending solution onto my craft sheet, and I'm picking it up with the foam applicator. Now you don't want to pick up too much, because if you bring too much blending solution onto the stencil, it will seep through and make a mess. So you just want a bit of the blending solution on your foam. That's why you saw me dab some of the excess off on the scrap paper up above. So I'm kind of swiping the inking tool over the stencil, and you'll see that where there are stencil openings, the color disappears. You're lifting the color with the blending solution. Blending solution makes the alcohol ink move, and in this case, we're picking it up with the foam. I do kind of rub the color off of the foam up on my scrap paper here and there so that I can have more of a clean piece of foam to keep removing the color. And I'll show you a trick with that in a moment. I'm going to keep adding more blending solution until I get a nice result when I peel up my stencil. And you'll see anywhere I applied the blending solution, I'll have that pattern where it's lighter. And look at that beautiful vellum that you've created. Next, I wanted to show you how this works on Yupo paper. So this is a really vivid Yupo paper background with lots of alcohol ink on it. I let it dry, put it under the stencil, and again I'm using my foam ink applicator to pick up a bit of blending solution and then just kind of spread it over the stencil. Again, don't oversaturate your foam or you'll end up with a mess. And you just want to keep going until you see that all the open areas of the stencil are lighter in color. And you can see the results of this are more intense than the ones on the vellum. Okay, I wanted to show you another way to kind of make two cards at once using this technique. On the left here, I have another Simon Says Stamp stencil over a piece of plain white cardstock, nothing fancy. On the right, I have another vellum background where I've put alcohol ink. On my ink applicator, I have put some of the blending solution, and I'm removing the ink or lifting the alcohol ink from the project on the right. And instead of just wiping off that excess ink onto scrap paper, I'm wiping it onto the project on the left. Now, once that project on the left is done, it's just going to look like an ink blended background over a stencil. However, we just made it while doing this card on the right. So again, for the project on the right here, I'm doing alcohol ink lifting over a stencil by putting some blending solution onto a foam applicator and spreading it around over the stencil. And I'm wiping off the excess alcohol ink on the foam applicator onto the project on the left. So I'm just kind of making use of that extra ink. And before I know it, that background on the left will be beautiful and just look ink blended. And I'll show you that example in a moment. So I went ahead and created a bunch of examples of using alcohol ink and then doing ink lifting with blending solution over a stencil. Let's start with all of the examples on vellum first. Here's the background that I made using like the pool colors of alcohol ink. Then we did the ink liftings over the stencil, and look how beautiful that is. I like that you can see through it. It's soft but has some variation to it. Just gorgeous. Now this one I did over the reds and oranges. You can see it's much more intense. In some areas you might notice that some of the blending solution kind of crept through the stencil and made some puddles. But this is a technique that doesn't need to be perfect. In fact, those little bits of, variation or imperfection really add a lot to the final results. This blue and purple is definitely my favorite. So these are all the vellum examples. So they're very soft and give a really dreamy-like background. Now, if you want something more intense, let's look at the Yupo backgrounds. So these are all the same colors, but this time on Yupo paper, which again is a synthetic paper. You could use glossy cardstock if you wanted to instead. You can see the colors are much more intense. Here I did some softer colors intentionally by adding some more alcohol to it to soften it up. but I really like when the colors are really intense like this. If you find there's a spot where the alcohol ink lift technique over the stencil didn't work so well, you can just cover it up with an embellishment. Okay, so I have a bunch of backgrounds to turn into cards. I'm going to show you the process for one of the cards and then the completed cards after that. Stay tuned. At the end of this video, I'm going to show you how to use your scraps to create yet another card. I decided to use a large, wide heart die to die cut from all of my alcohol ink pattern papers. This is from the Mama Elephant Favor Bag Accessory Love Die Cut Set, which includes a lot of different pieces, but I'm mainly using that large heart today. I put down a piece of Be Creative tape, which is double-sided and very strong, onto a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. I'm laying my vellum piece on there, and I found that adhesive didn't show through. It's okay if it did, because I will cover it. Next, I'm using the Simon's Stamp Modern Flower Die Set. I use this in another video, and I'll link to it here if you want to check it out. From the set, I'm using the leaf dies, and I die cut a bunch from some shimmer vellum that I got from a Vellum Assortment pack, and I'll link to that below. This vellum just has some shimmer to it. You can add your own shimmer to vellum if you prefer. I used these die cut vellum leaves on all of my examples, but I changed the sentiment up on each. For this particular example, I used the Simon's Stamp Perfection die set. This cuts the word perfection and the shadow, so there's 2 dies in the set. For the word perfection, I die cut from some white cardstock that has stick-it adhesive on the back already, so the adhesive is already there. I actually cut the I-O-N off, so I have the word perfect, just to change the sentiment a bit. I used the shadow die for the word perfection to cut from some of that vellum. I'm adding the word perfect onto it, and then I'm trimming off the rest of that vellum, since we don't have the I-O-N there anymore. With the stick-it adhesive, you need to use a bone folder or something to really press it in place, and then it'll stay stuck. Okay, so now I'm going to put a strip of Be Creative tape onto the back of that layered die cut perfect word. And I'm going to add those little vellum leaf die cuts to kind of come out from the sentiment. You could adhere these in different ways. Everybody has a favorite way to adhere vellum, but I like to tuck the vellum pieces behind something else, and so that holds it, so I don't have to worry about any adhesive showing through. So I press that into place. I'm going to tuck one more little vellum piece under there into the adhesive. If you find those vellum pieces are moving too much, you can use a strong liquid adhesive, just a little dot here and there under the vellum pieces, and let that dry, and that will hold it nicely. Next, I'm using the Simon's Stamp Thankful Heart stamp set to get the words "You Are Simply." It was from a sentiment that says "You are simply the best," but I cut off the word "the best," so I could just have "You are simply," and I can put that above the word "perfect." I'm going to send this to one of my daughter's friends who's in college and feeling a little discouraged, just to remind her that no matter what flaws we have, we're perfect as God intended. So that's where the sentiment is coming from. Next, I'm adding some little gems from Lucy's cards, just as some fun accents. So I kind of went through that fast, but I wanted to be able to show you all of the different examples that I made, not make this video too long. Here you can see the completed card. I kept everything else simple. I kept that background nice, bright white and simple. So the attention comes to that pattern vellum that we created. Here's another example using a similar heart piece, but this time I used a different sentiment. The sentiment strip I stamped from the Simon's Stamp Let Us Rejoice stamp set. I've used this one in videos before, and I really like the Sending My Prayers sentiment. For the main part of the sentiment, I did Take Care from the Simon's Stamp Take Care die. Here's the next example. A lot of the things are the same, but this time I used a hello die cut with the message "You are simply the best," which I showed you earlier. The hello is from the Simon's Stamp Hello Beautiful die. This basic card design can be used in so many different ways using any dies or sentiments you already have. Here's my teal alcohol ink vellum example. On this one, I used the Simon's Stamp Hey Love die. This is a great, beautiful die. I used the shadow die to cut from vellum, and then the word love I cut from white cardstock. I added Sending Lots of from the Simon Says Stamp Best Ever stamp set. I've used this die and stamp set in the past before, and they're two that I reach for quite often. Next, we have the blue vellum alcohol ink example that I did, and I used the same stamps and dies. You can see those vellum die cut leaves kind of sticking out. They look like they're floating there. And I added little pearls as accents. Here's the rainbow on vellum card example. I really like how this one turned out, and I kept the sentiment very simple by just doing the Take Care die cut. Now here's the example on the left where I did the same colors of alcohol ink, the same technique, but on Yupo paper. And you can see it dries so vivid. It's very different. I kept this one simple. The leaves didn't really work well on this one, so I used the hearts from the Simon Says Stamp Cupid's border die. I used that in my last video actually, and added some gems. Okay, so now let's look at the examples that I did on Yupo paper. You can see these are much more intense. And I'm going to compare this up against the vellum example. You can see I use the same colors, but get different results. Now in these Yupo paper examples, I used a Simon Says Stamp alphabet die set to create my own sentiment. I felt that stood out better, but I still used the vellum die cuts leaves to kind of stick out from it. Here I went back to that You Are Simply Perfect design that I showed you earlier. In all of these, I did scatter a few little gems or pearls just for simple accents. This one has Here For You. This is another Simon Says Stamp die set. I'm just kind of using different things that I still had out on my desk, just so I could show you more uses for the products that I've used in previous videos. This one I did alcohol ink back and forth on Yupo paper, and I have that Love die set once again, with Sending Lots of stamped right above it. Now remember before when I showed you how I was wiping off my foam applicator that had alcohol ink on it onto a stencil with white cardstock, just to make use of that extra ink. Well, once I was finished, this is what I had, and I die cut it from that heart and added Sending Lots of Love on top. That was just a way to use up some of that extra color instead of letting it go to waste. I also wanted to show you that you can use your extra scraps from your alcohol ink backgrounds, or even the areas that you don't feel turned out as good as the others, to create other fun cards. I keep all of these pieces and use them on future cards. And here's a good example for using up these little scraps. I took some of my little scrap alcohol ink pieces and I cut them to be just a little bit bigger than these circle die cut windows from this new Simon Says Stamp circle window die. I die cut that circle window die from a piece of 4 by 5 1/4 inch white cardstock. It makes 6 perfect little windows that I can tape these scraps onto the back of, so those little pieces show through and nobody would ever know those are scraps. Once I was done, I have a piece of craft foam here that has some dimension. I put double-sided tape on both sides, and I'm adding that in between our little die cut piece and a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch note card, so that there's some dimension to it. I die cut the Love shadow die from white cardstock, and then I die cut the word love itself from an extra scrap of that alcohol ink background. You can see it over to the left there. I glued those pieces down along with some leaf die cuts from vellum and some little gems. So this was an excellent way to use up those scraps, and I still have a lot of scraps left over that I can use on additional cards. Just ran out of time today. Okay, so there you have it, another way to use those alcohol inks. Remember, if you do not have alcohol inks, you can use your Copic markers or your Copic marker refills. Or you can do this technique today where we did the lifting of color by applying a distress ink background on white cardstock, laying the stencil down, and then using a foam applicator with water to pull away some of the color. I hope this was inspiring to you. Please check out the supplies below in my YouTube description if you want to see any of them. Also, be sure to go to my blog where I have photos of all of these examples, because you definitely want to kind of take a closer look at the different results you can get. In the middle are a couple other alcohol ink videos and a distress ink lifting video in case you don't have alcohol inks. Thanks for watching. I hope you return again soon and have a great weekend.